Okay, this is Karen White of Divine Time Astrology, and I am here again with my special guest, Neeshee.Pandit. And today we're going to talk about the lunar eclipse in Leo for each of the signs, how it relates to our health, and if Neeshee has any Ayurveda things to add, he will. And yeah, so nice to see you again, Neeshee.
It's good to be back, Karen.
It's only been a month since I saw you last.
That's right.
And a lot has happened since then already. Okay, so first we can talk a little bit about the signs and the elements, because the moon, the full moon, is in Leo.
Right.
And it's a fire sign. And of course, the sun is in Aquarius, so opposite it in air signs. And do you want to talk about that a bit, just the element and the modality of it? Because it's
sure. Leo is a fire sign. It's a fixed sign. It corresponds to the digestive system, or the center of the body. And because that's where our fire is, basically. Like the fire in the body is in the digestive system, where all the transformational processes are happening at the physical level. And there's fires at every level. And Leo kind of epitomizes that idea of fire, of the centrality of fire, of transformation, of the kingdom, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's a stable kingdom because it's the sun's sign, right?
Yeah.
The sun represents steadfastness, reliability, constancy, light, energy, the source of things, our soul. It's always interesting when you have like the sun in Cancer or the moon in Leo, like when the sun or the moon are in one of God's other signs.
That.
I always think it's interesting.
Yeah, because the moon being opposite the sun is what's creating the full moon.
That's right.
The sun is in his weakest sign right now. And
right.
The moon is in Leo. So that's kind of interesting.
I mean, it's always a good thing, at least in terms of the avashtas, when you have like a sun-moon opposition. It's, you know, the sun and the moon are beneficial to each other. You know, they have a beneficial relationship, obviously, because the moon has nothing to say for itself without sunlight. You know, it has no function, basically, other than being a rock. It's not luminous without the sun. So
it's not luminous, yeah. Though I think it's not luminous. A role to play even when it's dark. But
that's
still,
true. It does have a role to play when it's dark, but it's only dark for a very short amount of time.
Yes, this is true.
It's considered to be a luminary, like the sun, basically. You know, these are our luminous, the source of light on our planet.
So the last time that we talked about the partial solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
Now this time we've got a full lunar eclipse.
That's right.
And I read somewhere that it's like the only full lunar eclipse of the year.
That's right.
And in the sign of Leo, so maybe we could talk a bit about the moon, because the moon is obviously the focus of our conversation today.
That's right. Well, it's definitely interesting, you know, to have a full moon eclipse, and not only, you know, like a total eclipse. You know, this is the most powerful type of eclipse that there is. Just like the full moon in and of itself is like the moment of lunar potency, you know. So the eclipse is going to be the most potent that you can possibly get. You know, a partial eclipse is exactly that. It's partial. It's an eclipse, but somewhat.
Right.
Whereas with the full moon eclipse, it's just, this is a full-blown eclipse. You know, so that's always major, and it's the only total eclipse we're going to have for several years.
Do you know what's interesting is that, well, I don't have any diagrams or anything, but I guess we can still talk about it. How the chart itself for the eclipse doesn't look the way you would expect it to.
Right.
Because Rahu is in Cancer, but the moon is in Leo, so they're right next to each other.
Right.
And yet I'm feeling this eclipse. Now, oftentimes I don't feel anything. I'm like, okay. There was a huge big deal made about this, but I feel nothing. But I think because Rahu is approaching the degree of my natal Rahu in Scorpio, I'm feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just this kind of emotional turbulence. It's
Exactly.
affecting my dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And waking up, you're waking up with a dream that sort of has a mood to it that's been affecting me so far all day.
Kind of a psychologically significant dream.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm thinking, yeah, but the moon's in Leo. It's not on anything personal in my chart. But then I'm thinking, oh, but Rahu is.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's no such thing as an eclipse without Rahu or Ketu. Otherwise, we're just talking about a full moon or the sun sign or the moon sign, right? I mean, what makes the eclipse an eclipse is Rahu or Ketu, those nodes, those intersections. So what's happening with the lunar eclipse is that there's a full moon and the light of what it is actually the Earth's shadow that is causing that gives us the visual appearance of that eclipse,
Mm-hmm.
In order for that alignment to happen, the sun, the moon, and the earth have to be in a unique alignment with each other for this light reflection to happen.
Yeah.
And that's why you see that the sun and the moon are in different signs, as they have to be, and that Rahu is also in a different sign from the moon. It's not the same as a Rahu-moon conjunction. It's this kind of unique alignment between the sun, the moon, and the earth that's causing a lunar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to just consider that even, that the earth has a unique role, that, the earth is involved in its alignment with all of this.
Yeah.
Because
Couldn't
the moon
happen
is also the only planet that, just exclusively circles around our planet. It's the satellite for Earth. It's not just like part of our solar system. It is, but it's uniquely attuned to Earth. It's our moon. And that's really important. What's happening with the moon reflects what's happening on Earth, in significant ways. So in a lot of ways, I think a lunar eclipse is very significant. Uniquely significant.
It is, yeah. And I also just realized, for some reason, that Rahu in Cancer is exactly at the same degree as my moon in Pisces.
Interesting.
So there's like this thing going on between the moon in Pisces, Rahu in Cancer, and Rahu in Scorpio. It's like a grand trine thing is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So people watching, if you have the moon in Scorpio or Cancer or Pisces, you might be feeling this more.
Also, I'll say that, I did my write-up for the lunar eclipse, and people can read that where I talked about this some more. But basically, I think that eclipse seasons, or when we're looking at, eclipses always happen together, solar and lunar eclipses. So I'm looking at them as a cycle, and I think that they're inherently connected to one another. And I kind of demonstrated in my article the ways in which this eclipse is related to the one before us.
So what's the name of the article again? Because I put it in my blog post last time. So would I be putting the same articles in there again this time?
This is a new one.
Oh, it's a new one. Okay.
This is about the lunar eclipse.
Okay, what's the name of it?
True Soma.
True Soma. I saw you mention that on the caller list.
Yep. So the point is that the solar eclipses and the lunar eclipses of a single season are actually like the two halves of one cycle. They form like a single pattern, and we can see, especially with the cards, how they're connected to each other. And so I think that despite the fact that this eclipse, for example, is not happening in Capricorn, it's still on the axis. It's still the same nodal axis of Cancer Capricorn is activated. And so people who experienced the last eclipse are still going to experience this one, even though you can look at it and be like, oh, but the moon is in Leo and it's not really happening in Capricorn like it was for me before. You're still going to feel that because it's like the second half of what came before.
Part of the same cycle. In fact, so let's share the screen. So here's the chart of the full moon in Leo. And as we see here, Rahu is actually in Cancer. But I'm going to go over to the cards of truth. So it's a 7 of diamonds.
The 7 of diamonds.
So would you talk about that a little bit and how it relates to the lunar eclipse? I would like to hear what you think about that.
Why don't you click on the 7 of diamonds so that it opens up the spread. There we go. Well, you know, 7 is a number of Saturn. So there's those themes of course, letting go, sacrifice, surrender, needing to release something. Also, you know, the Mercury card is a 9 of spades, and the 9 of spades was the birth card of the solar eclipse.
Right. Oh, so there's
I've noticed that time and time again that there's always some kind of a link between them. It's different every time what the link is, but you'll see them, you'll see a correspondence. Also, between this spread and the partial solar eclipse spread, there's 4 cards in common. The King of Diamonds, the King of Hearts, the 2 of Hearts, and the 2 of Diamonds. All 4 of those cards are in each of the spreads, birth spreads of the eclipses.
Interesting. Okay.
What also stands out to me is that the 2 of Hearts is on the Jupiter card, and 2 is the number for the moon.
Right.
And the heart, you know, 2 of Hearts is the key card for the heart suit, because it's the second suit, the moon, the heart.
Right.
And Jupiter is exalted in the moon sign. So I just thought it was auspicious to see the 2 of Hearts in the Jupiter position, because Jupiter is very closely connected with the moon and what the moon is about, you know?
Yeah. They're both perspective planets. They both look all around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you had the other 2 of Diamonds as the ecliptic card. I just thought that was interesting, that there's 2 2s and there's 2 kings. And so the kings are, you know, that Plutonian energy of letting go, of destruction of something that's no longer necessary or usable to the person, you know. And it's interesting that in Capricorn all this time, there's already been a strong Pluto-Saturn theme, you know.
Yeah.
And so I just think we're seeing more of that theme through the eclipses as well. This Pluto-Saturn thing is pretty strong.
So now the hearts, aren't they related to fruits? So also getting, as something is passing away, as something is leaving or ending, isn't there some fruit that comes with that?
Yes, there's nourishment, right? Right. That's what the heart represents, and that's what Soma is, you know? It's like the nourishment of life, and that's what the moon is, represents that nourishment as well. And so I've made the distinction between Rahu and Ketu eclipses by saying that Ketu eclipses are about releasing something, and Rahu eclipses are about assimilating something. So
now Soma, isn't that related? No, that's not the same thing as Amrit, which is the nectar of immortality. Soma,
it is similar. It is. You could say that Amrit is like a more refined version of Soma. You know, it's like the next level from Soma. It exists within the umbrella of Soma.
Okay, and Soma is the moon god for people listening.
Soma is the moon god. Soma is the moon itself. Soma is nourishing the nourishing aspect of life energy. There's foods that have more Soma. There's substances that have a lot of Soma. So it's an eclipse that's encouraging us to assimilate a new form of nourishment in our life, or to become more aligned with what's actually nourishing to us, you know?
Yeah.
Because like I said about the solar eclipse, we were having to reevaluate like our actions in life, and to see like in what ways is our external not accurately reflecting, you know, what we really need at the internal level. Well, this is now like the evolution of that. It's saying, okay, you've let go of something, and now you need to assimilate that new possibility, that new reality, that new form of food and nourishment in your life. So that's, you know, kind of a synopsis of how I'm seeing this eclipse.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good synopsis, actually. I see a lot of feminine energy here.
There's a lot of red, right?
Yeah, a lot of red, which is in feminine, and hearts is the fulfillment. It's fulfillment.
Exactly.
Nourishment and fulfillment. Well, that's good. Okay, so we can go back to, okay, so you want to, let's start with Aries, as usual. So the lunar eclipse is actually on the 21st. We're a little bit late getting this out this week because it's been a really intense week, but I'm going to do my best to get this out today. So now, starting with Aries, what we see is that the moon is in the 5th sign from Aries, because the moon is in Leo, and it's aspecting Aries itself, so its first house. It's aspecting, it's in the 5th, and it's aspecting the 7th house for Aries, and the 10th house for Aries as well. So this is fire. There's a nice fire connection here. This is an easy flowing combination. So this should be more of an easy aspect than a difficult one. And then, of course, you know, it's casting its eclipse onto the 7th house, which is partnerships of all kinds and relationship with the public. So there may be something going on in your relationship life that maybe will change, that you'll be letting go of, and also getting some fulfillment from too. Because I'm noticing something here. Now, the sign that the moon is in Leo, but the nakshatra that it's in is Pushya, which is the most nurturing nakshatra.
That's right.
Ruled by Saturn, so there's that Saturn thing again. I mean, yeah, ruled by Saturn. So there's another Saturn theme. And then all these planets here in the 10th for Aries. So Saturn and Mars, look at how close they are in degree.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
Creating a nice square, or 410, depending on how you want to look at it. So in Vedic astrology, it's a 410 thing, which is related to, usually associated with power and a rise in power. Whereas in the Western system, a square, this is more like some kind of a difficult adjustment situation. And it makes sense that they would both be involved, actually, because when you're doing something that requires a lot of energy, which for Aries rising is a lot going on in the 10th here, there is some effort, there's some difficulty involved with that. Now, the moon aspecting all of this, because the moon is aspecting the sign of its debilitation in Capricorn. So I would say it may be something going on at work that you're not able to see totally clearly. What would you say about this, Neeshee?
Well, I think Aries people have a nice opportunity for their creative output with this full moon, this eclipse. And that's a really positive thing with that 5th house, you know, the moon in the 5th house.
Yeah.
I do think there might be some struggles with their work, you know, or some crisis around work that they're going to have to deal with right now. But with all this creative energy simultaneously being aroused, I think it won't be a problem. It'll just be a way for them to readjust to something that is more deeply inspiring to them.
It could be moving them forward in some way.
I would think so, yeah.
Perhaps by letting go of something. And it could be something as simple as some kind of procedure or routine that you have that is just unnecessarily time-consuming and not really that necessary. And I'm saying that is just because of Saturn. You know, he narrows the path. He's the destiny planet that narrows the path. And then Mercury is involved with manifestation and management of details. So that suggests some kind of work routine that is being pared down. That would be maybe not as welcome to everyone involved in using it, but nevertheless would be make everything much more efficient. And then K2 there too. K2 is with Mercury in particular. Look how close they are by degree.
Mm-hmm.
It's very close. So there's an intense concentration on Mercury things, which is business, management, the management of details of things, the management of projects, the management of people. So that would be interesting to actually hear about from my clients, like what is actually going on for them in the work arena.
I could see it as like a frustration with bureaucracy and a need to like assert a kind of creative independence.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see that too. Okay, and then the moon aspecting the first house for Aries. So it's the full moon, but it's also the eclipse. So that's like two different kinds of energies right there.
Yeah, it's light, but it's dark.
It's kind of weird. So the full moon gives, okay? That's why I picked the full moon and not the new moon to do forecasts on every month, because the full moon gives. But yet it's an eclipse. And then the symbolism of the eclipse is sort of like the opposite of that.
Right.
So this is tough to reconcile, this one. What comes to your mind with your fantastic exalted Jupiter, Neeshee?
What comes to my mind is that the eclipse, the shadow part of the eclipse is just you know, the other side of the light. It's showing us a place where we could potentially have more light in our life. And there's always a place where we can have more light in our life. And we need to recognize what those areas are in order for them to be illuminated or brought to consciousness. So, you know, an eclipse is just that part of the moon that's showing us, look, this is an area that could be, you know, have a lot more light in your life. But right now it's a bit shadowy, it's a bit gray. And in fact, until this moment, you may not have even known about it. So that's why, you know, there's that light dark play, but you need to have that play because that's what allows you to grow, you know, to become more mature. So it's nice. It's a full moon. There's a lot to be given, you know, but it's going to require us to see something, you know, to make more room for it than we have before.
Yeah, so the ascendant Lord Mars is in its own house here. Mm-hmm. So there is a strong emphasis on the self and on the body. And this is a good thing. And then the sun is aspecting the sign of its exaltation here too. Mm-hmm. So it does look a lot like career stuff, for sure. Self and career, and maybe identity around that.
A lot of fire.
A lot of fire. So a lot of movement. And the earth here too. You know, earth and fire combinations, in terms of astrology, they're not considered to be compatible. But what I've noticed in just doing astrology and doing charts for people, that people who have that combination tend to be really powerful people. Mm-hmm. I mean, they tend to get things done. And maybe it's because earth is, you know, associated with the concrete world. And then fire is movement. And light. There's a lot of movement in light with fire and warmth. Mm-hmm. And intuition and inspiration. So yeah, see, we're finding the good stuff here.
Yeah, I think Aries people should, you know, take it easy during the eclipse because they've got a lot to deal with here.
Which reminds me, again, I really liked what you told us last time about a ritual that people could have around the eclipse. And it's not just solar eclipse. I am assuming it also applies to lunar eclipse.
Right.
Which is the fasting.
Fasting before the eclipse.
Right.
And like meditating or chanting or reading, you know, spiritual texts or doing yoga during the eclipse. And what did I say to do after the eclipse?
Cleanse.
Cleansing, right. Bathing.
Right. And donating.
Right, donations.
Right, donations.
The other thing people can do, you know, and I wrote about this in my latest article, is one of the primary remedies for eclipses I find is Hatha yoga and Pranayama.
Okay, explain what those mean.
So Hatha yoga is basically translates to be sun moon yoga. It's a series of yoga asanas that almost everybody would recognize from yoga class, but this is like the classical yoga. It doesn't have any fancy name like power yoga or hot yoga or whatever. This is just like the actual Hatha yoga. Call it whatever you want.
You're talking about Hatha yoga?
Or whatever.
You mean Hatha yoga?
Yeah, I mean Hatha yoga.
Okay. Yeah. So that's just mostly based on the physical, though.
That's right. That's physical. But it's a series of asanas that are lunar and then solar in their quality. So you do it in a certain order, you know. When you do it in that order, it's like there'll be poses that are like contracting and there'll be poses that are like expansive, you know, that stretch.
Okay.
So it's like a sun moon yoga. It balances like the sun.
Would you spell that word?
How do you spell Hatha?
Yeah.
Hatha.
So Hatha. So you're just pronouncing it differently.
I'm pronouncing it differently because it's
most people do.
In Sanskrit, it's a ta rather than a th.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an aspirated T.
Okay. And then what's the other kind of yoga?
Pranayama.
Pranayama. Okay.
Pranayama works directly with the left and the right nostril and balancing the flow of the breath, which is also related, you know, to the solar nadis and the lunar nadis, the Ida and the Pingala. So that's basically what's happening during eclipses, you know, is one of those channels is tending to be overstimulated, and it's useful to just apply a countermeasure so that you make best use of it at that time.
So the alternating nostril breathing exercise.
Alternating nostril breathing, or you can just do simple pranayama, which is just like inhaling all the way into the navel, holding the breath, and then fully exhaling all of the air.
Okay. So that's during the eclipse.
That's right.
Okay, great. So shall we move on then to Taurus?
Taurus.
Oh, okay. Just had to click on it. Okay, so for Taurus, Earth sign. For Taurus, the moon in Leo, the full moon eclipsing in Leo, is in the 4th house. And it is aspecting the 6th, the 9th, and the 12th for Taurus rising sun or moon. So this is right in the house of your inner emotional life. It's your actual house. It's your mother. It's your family in general. But mostly it's the inner emotional life. And it's aspecting the 6th house, which has to do with, usually with health things. The 9th house, which is spiritual, higher knowledge. It's also marriage, the father, and the 12th house, which is typically expenses, but can also be a house of spiritual freedom, spiritual liberation. So it's therefore associated with meditation in ashrams and that kind of thing. Okay, so with this right there in the 4th house, now this is that double meaning thing here. One, it's a full moon, so it's giving something. And yet it's an eclipse at the same time. And it's challenging to astrologers to explain exactly what this means. So I'm thinking that is going to be very individual thing, because the 4th house is such a personal house, and how it's going to manifest for each Taurus rising person. Now it's ruled by the sun. So depending on where the sun is in your natal chart, there may be some say on how this actually works out. But for Taurus rising, the moon is ruling the third, and the third house is siblings, communications, skills, and basically, you know, the rudimentary knowledge of any body of knowledge. So perhaps you'll just be spending some time at home alone and working on something like a hobby, or spending time with a sibling and maybe talking about some of the shared emotional history that you have together. And then the sixth house is related to the health, like I said, and it's a full moon, so it's giving something. It's an eclipse, so you might be stopping something or ending something. Would you say this was a good time to get a consultation, perhaps with a Ayurveda practitioner like Neeshee, or acupuncturist or massage therapist or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. Anytime the sixth house is getting aspected or is involved with the full moon, I think it's a good time to focus on health, because you can gain something from putting attention on that house.
Right, right. Now, since it's an eclipse also, would it be bringing something to light that has been hidden? Or do you think it would be something that maybe you still can't quite see entirely?
I think it'll be more something that you can't quite see entirely, because it's a North Node eclipse.
Right.
It's not going to be stirring up like a repressed thing. It's going to be revealing a territory that exists, but that you may not have been aware of.
Oh, okay.
New modalities, new therapies, new diagnoses, new results.
Okay. Now, and then it's aspecting the ninth house, and that's higher knowledge. And there's a lot of energy going on here for Taurus. It's also related to marriage, the father, and Saturn being there could be letting go of something, separating from something. Also, perhaps tapping into some traditional knowledge, like maybe a faith or a spiritual path that you were raised in. You may be able to see something about it because of the full moon shedding its light on it, about that you can incorporate into your present spiritual practice. You know, I know very few people who are practicing the religion of their youth, of their family. Unless their parents were atheist or agnostic, which means nothing in particular.
Right.
People who are raised that way often continue that way. But this Saturn being there, people I've known who have Saturn prominent in their chart in special certain places, when they do get involved with religion or spirituality, they tend to go more for the old school stuff, or the fundamental type of thing. Have you noticed that? Yeah. So, or it could be separating from that kind of a tradition. They could be doing that, like the opposite of that. Now, Mars in the 12th, let me see, what is Mars ruling for? That's the 7th Lord. Now, this could definitely be something hidden going on as it relates to your partner, or an expense that relates to your partner. Or maybe you and your partner decide to start doing some kind of meditation practice together. It certainly would be a good time to start doing that anyway. But there could be something that you're not seeing clearly yet, too, about that. Let's say your turn, Neeshee. Anything related to Ayurveda or anything like that you see?
Well, Taurus is an earth sign, and so is Capricorn, where there's a lot of energy. And Leo's a fire sign. Libra is an air sign. And Aries is another fire sign. So there's a nice mix going on here. I think it'll probably be an emotional time for Taurus. I think they'll find the eclipse to be more emotional. And, you know, Taurians tend to be already oriented toward the concrete world and the material domain of things. And that's why I think it's interesting, all these planets in Capricorn, and there's going to be this kind of reevaluation of their philosophy, you know, and how they feel about their life, how they feel about what they're doing. And I agree that Mars placement in the 12th is really interesting. I do think it would be a powerful time to engage in meditation or any like energy-based practices. I think those would be quite fruitful.
So what do you mean by energy-based practices?
I mean, Qigong, Tai Chi, therapies, even, you know, receiving therapy, energy form therapies, yoga.
Okay. Yeah, especially because the 6th is also activated for Taurus rising. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
And the Sun, which is the 4th house lord, is also aspecting that house in a Gemini aspect. So
yeah, there's a lot of crucial points being hit for Taurus.
Yeah. And also expenses. So like maybe managing them or being aware of them, becoming aware of them, and maybe also being aware that there may be something hidden along those lines that maybe you can start investigating. So you ready for Gemini?
Yeah, I'm ready for Gemini.
Okay, Gemini rising, sun or moon. For Gemini, the full moon eclipse is happening in the 3rd house, aspecting the 5th house, aspecting the 8th house, and aspecting the 11th house. So the 3rd house is siblings, teammates, meaning people that you work with, skills, competition. But I mostly associate this house with skills and communication often. So this could be a conversation. It could be a contemplation about this. Maybe because the moon is also the mind. It's the sense mind, so it's a type of knowledge that is not necessarily connected to verbal expression. So something good giving itself to you there, and something also hidden from you. Now the 5th, the house of creativity, and the moon is aspecting that. So there's, again, something positive there that can come from it. Some kind of a creative project maybe that you're working on. You can make some progress on that and shed some light on it and get some fulfillment from it. Now it's also aspecting the 8th house, and I mostly associate this with the occult sciences, you know, astrology being one of them. Though it's also the resources of your partner, and there's a lot of stuff going on here. So there may be a little bit of separation between you and your partner's resources, maybe, or the bond with your partner. Maybe there's a need for a little bit more separation there. And then Mercury with manifestation, managing the details. Let's see, what is Mercury ruling for? Oh, it's the ascendant lord for Gemini and the 4th house. So that's something to think about. Just tell you what those things are, and you can figure out for yourself what they might mean for you. So the 4th house is the emotional happiness, your home, real estate, fixed assets, vehicles, academic degrees, and pets. Yeah. So there may be something going on with any one of those significations for Mercury, for Gemini rising in particular. And now Mars in the 11th house of gains and income, and the full moon aspecting that, giving something. This could be an increase of some kind of a boost, simply because the full moon gives. Now, as far as an eclipse goes, in regarding that, so you know more about eclipses than I do, Neeshee. So what would you say about that? Just with that particular topic of gains and income, with that dual meaning thing going on there, but yet a powerful planet being in that house.
Well, I think it's very subjective. You know, it's hard to say what's happening with that person's, relationship to money and so forth. I mean, I could say that generally speaking, eclipses bring out or usually point out an area of pathology, or an area where there's no energy, because where there's energy or light, that's where we're healthy. But where there's not, we have a weakness, we have a pathology, we have a disease process. That can be at any level, even psychologically, in fact, primarily psychologically. So it would totally depend on this person's relationship to money. If that's like a problem area of their life and they have a lot of contraction around it, a lot of stress and anxiety around it, then I would say this is a time when something about that is going to get magnified so that they can understand something about it, and change. But if it's an already kind of healthy part of their life, then that could simply continue to be that way, or strengthened by whatever part of their life is getting to be revealed as not healthy, It's about integration, becoming more whole, more balanced, and that affects everything. So it would totally depend on the person.
Okay, so the significations of the 11th house are side ventures, oldest sibling, winnings, social life, and income from your job or career. And I was noticing that they're not the Gemini aspects, but Venus, which is the 5th lord of fortune, it's one of the best planets for Gemini rising, is making an exact trine to Mars here. So I'm seeing something positive in that. The 9th lord too, which is another fortune planet, is also making an aspect to it, though it's a 410 or a square aspect. So maybe some effort that you're putting into a side venture, another stream of income, would certainly be a worthwhile thing to be doing. Okay, that's all I have for Gemini. Now, if you have more to add, it's your turn anyway, I think.
I think for Gemini, this eclipse could be a good time for making new connections. And I think it's interesting that the moon is 3rd and that Gemini is the 3rd sign. So yeah, that's a nice placement, for Gemini. And I think they can make a new connection either with themselves or with somebody else. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with the Mars in the 11th, is there might be some gains to be had, in these new connections, in whatever way they're working, whether that's internal or external, personal or group. The 8th house, definitely an interesting area. I think for everybody, Capricorn is really representing where there's a more afflicted energy, in the chart, just because of Saturn and Ketu, and then Mercury sandwiched between them.
Yeah.
So for everybody, in a way, I mean, like Jupiter and and Venus are doing fine in Sagittarius. Whenever we get to people who have that in their aspects, and the full moon is the full moon. And then Mars is doing great in his own sign, So however that plays out for people is how it plays out. But every time we're looking at it, I see that Capricorn is kind of the difficult zone.
Yeah.
So
Now, one of the ways, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know what that means, you know, for the 8th house. I think maybe it has to do with the kind of a reevaluation of like the deeper levels of a person's life, you know, because the 8th house is Ayus, so it's like that deep life force.
Mm-hmm.
And Capricorn is very kind of the externals of a person's life and activity. Mm-hmm. So somewhere those two things have to kind of match up. And that's already been a theme of the eclipse. And I think maybe that'll be a theme for Gemini as well. And whatever this, you know, new ventures they're getting involved in, it seems like there's kind of that energy of a potential new venture or new connection.
Yeah, another thing that occurred to me too is that K2 is the planet that actually rules astrology.
Right.
House is part of the occult sciences, so there can be some focus, like maybe that's one of the ways you can ground the energy in a positive way, is to further your studies, especially during the full moon, that's shedding light. And the eclipse, well, it's the 8th house is already hidden knowledge, so
maybe it's perfect time. Maybe it's perfect time to explore hidden knowledge, you know?
Yeah, there you go.
It's a good time to study astrology if you're a Gemini person, or to get an astrology reading. Yeah. Something of that kind. I think it would be useful.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so anything in terms of Ayurveda for Gemini? There doesn't seem to be anything really.
No, I think
strongly emphasized.
I think they're okay. Just you know, I think everybody should take it easy during the eclipse, not try to do, you know, anything too ambitious.
Good idea. Okay, so on to our little commercial. So if you're enjoying this video and you want more on Ayurveda and astrology, please hit like and subscribe. And also, if you comment below, I will reply to you. Even if it's not right away, I will reply to you. Oh, on to Cancer rising sun or moon. Now for Cancer, the full moon and the lunar eclipse is happening in the 2nd house, and aspecting the 4th, the 7th, and the 10th. So the 2nd house, well, this is your resources and your money and things that are valuable to you. It has to do with your values, your family, the people that are really close to you. It's also the house of getting your needs met. And the full moon here is actually a very fortunate thing. And this is where you can see more clearly about getting your needs met. And you usually typically get something too. There's some kind of fulfillment that happens there. Now with the eclipse happening there, maybe something hidden that you didn't even know that you needed now becomes more obvious to you. And it's interesting too, because the moon here is aspecting the 4th house of the inner emotional life, which the moon is, it's the moon's natural house there, its natural home. So there may be something with your mother, your actual home, real estate in general, maybe a vehicle, something like that. Maybe you get a new car. Now the 7th house is partners, and Mercury being there too means like business partners in particular. And then the partner's planet in his own house. Now this has been happening an awful lot in my practice when it comes to horary astrology, where somebody asks about a partner or a potential partner, and there's the partner's planet right there in their house. Usually what that means is that the partner is kind of withdrawn and has gone into themselves and is concentrating on their own affairs during this time. So if you're feeling a bit of separation from your partner, just think of it as the ebb, you know, when the water at the beach goes out And that happens in every relationship long term. There's an ebb and a flow, an ebb and a flow. Now, because the full moon is aspecting it, there will be something pleasant, something good. But because Saturn is there and he's in his own house, there may still be some kind of separation at the same time. So a coach would ask you, what's great about that? And if you think about it, there probably is something good about it. You just have to think about it. As far as the eclipses goes, I'm just going to let Neeshee address that because I'm nice. Actually, what it means is I don't know what to say about that. So now, and it's aspecting the 10th as well. And this is a nice trine going on here. So something at work, and I see Mars going through the 10th typically means that you're really, really busy. And often so busy that you don't really have time for contemplation. But the full moon aspecting that, something good, something pleasant, some kind of fruit of all of that hard work that you've been doing. And because of the eclipse, maybe something changing as well. Okay, so your turn, Neeshee.
Okay, Cancer. Well, Rahu's on the ascendant. You know, all their major houses are lit up. So the first house is lit up because of Rahu. Fourth house is lit up through aspect from the full moon. Seventh house aspected by the full moon, and then the 10th house aspected by the full moon. Those are all the major houses that I look at when it comes to an eclipse transit as well. So, because those are the most self-oriented houses. They're the houses that relate to the self, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, I've noticed that eclipses tend to bring up crises in relationships, despite where the eclipse is happening in the person's chart, just because of the nature of Rahu and Ketu as being seventh from each other. And that Rahu and Ketu in general always seem to bring up something in that context of relationship, where there's another, where there's a reflection, you know? So here with that seventh house being lit up by the full moon, I would not be surprised, you know, if there was something that needed to be processed in the relationship. You know, to me, this looks like a pretty characteristic scenario where things could come up in the relationship around this eclipse. So I would just be very conscious about that and recognize that whatever is coming up is not just some kind of blanket arbitrary negative, but that it has a purpose, it's coming up for a reason, and it's something to just deal with as consciously as possible. It'll make everything, you know, much stronger, you know, in the future. So I think it could be an emotional time for Cancer, already an emotional sign. But the Mars in the 10th house, I like that. You know, there's some nice energy driving their life right now. So I think despite what comes up, they're going to remain quite functional. Mm-hmm. They're going to remain quite active, and you know, that'll be grounding. There's a lot of fire element here that grounds some of that water, keeps it moving, you know. Mm-hmm. So I think they'll be okay as long as they're able to get through this crisis.
Right, and I was thinking too about this separation thing from the partner. With Rahu in the ascendant, there's an emphasis on the self, mm-hmm. a need for more self-development, and not so much emphasis on the partner.
That's right. It's just more self-discovery and self-exploration, and putting less energy into, you know, the relationship as an imbalancing element, you know? Yeah,
and yet at the same time, they've got all this other energy in that house. So it's a paradox. There you go again. There's always these opposites that we're working with.
Right. It's not about denying one thing for the sake of the other. It's just about understanding a healthier relationship to that thing.
There we go. Okay. Now, Leo. Leo is it this month because the full moon is happening right there in Leo in the first house. So And it's aspecting the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th. Now, this is your rising sign, isn't it, Neeshee?
That's right.
Okay, so now when the full moon is going through the 1st house, that is one of the nice placements for it. It means that if there's something that you haven't been giving yourself because you've been busy with other things, and Leo, being ruled by the sun, tends to be thinking about everyone else instead of themselves anyway. With the full moon here, now it's time for you to maybe just take the day, take it easy, and treat yourself to something that you need, that perhaps you've just been putting off because you're busy or because you think it's more important to give it to other people. Now, the eclipse there, I'm going to leave Neeshee to talk about that, because when it comes to the body, which is the 1st house, I'm not really sure what the eclipse would mean. At the same time, you've got a giving full moon there, except maybe just something. Would you associate eclipses with the shadow because it's associated with Rahu and Ketu?
Yeah, absolutely.
And yes, and it's also, see, it's aspected by Saturn too here, which is another aspect of the shadow. So perhaps the eclipse will bring out something about yourself that you weren't consciously aware of. And because it's a full moon, even though it's the eclipse, I still think it's something positive, something that you can incorporate into your conscious awareness. And the 3rd house, communication and skills, also your daily routine. So perhaps you want to, something you can add to your daily routine that would be supportive. The 6th house of health again. So there's kind of a theme here in regarding the 1st house and how that is affecting the body. And then the 9th house of higher knowledge. And I also see it as other cultures, like, you know, special trips, pilgrimages, the guru, spiritual development. And Mars is one of the planets of consciousness. He's logic. So I'm seeing this also as an opportunity for a lot of growth, new growth, because it's Aries, right, in spiritual development. Yeah, especially testing what you're believing in terms of whether or not it really makes logical sense. Okay, so your turn.
Well, I think there's a lot for Leo that has to do with health and this eclipse, because the full moon is in the 1st house, the body. The 6th house is being aspected. You know, I think one of the effects of eclipses at a physical level is simply feeling kind of tired, or feeling spacey, or feeling like just not quite vitalized, not quite, you don't quite feel like you're in your body all the way, or that you just have a ton of energy to do something. You feel like there's a little bit of a lag, you know? That's how I think Leo is going to feel it. I think it's an opportunity for them to apply themselves to like a more purifying diet and just kind of use it as a moment for like physical purification and rejuvenation.
So especially important to fast then for Leo?
To fast, or just to eat, you know, particularly nutritious foods that are light, you know. Like I've been eating a lot of salads.
Oh yeah, that fiery Mars is aspecting the 1st house too, so there's maybe an excess of the Agni. Or maybe not. Let me see.
It could be, you know, just that there's a lot of, you know, fire is also what purifies the toxins.
Purifies. Right.
So it's important to just use it as a time to rebalance, because all these planets in Capricorn, including the last eclipse in Capricorn, was not the best thing for Leo's health. So they're kind of going through shifts in their health, for sure. And this is a time to just kind of rejuvenate. So I think, juice fasting, raw food, light diet, nutritious foods, all those things are positive for Leo right now to just shift their health, in a positive direction.
Yeah, I was noticing here that Mars is aspecting the 4th for Leo.
Right.
Yeah. That's
exactly.
Okay. Virgo. Now at Virgo, things switch and start moving in the other direction. So the full moon eclipse is in the 12th for Virgo. It's aspecting the 2nd, the 5th, and the 8th house. Okay, so in the 12th, I just see this as the perfect time to stay home and to just go into your private prayer room. It's a good time for reflection. And there's no pun intended with that. The moon being full there. But yeah, this is like meditation, writing, thinking, praying, reading. It seems like that would be probably the most rejuvenating thing that Virgo rising could do with the full moon there and the eclipse there. Then the 2nd house, your resources, money, income, wealth, family life, what you eat and drink too. It's your food. Your close friends and advisors. So for Virgo rising, let me see, with this 5th house, all these planets in the 5th are also aspecting the 1st house too, though they're not Gemini aspects, but they're aspecting the 1st house. There's like an emphasis on Earth here for Virgo, though there's some fire being brought into it through Mars and the moon. So I'm going to be interested in what you have to say for what they need to eat or not eat during this time. So anyway, the 5th house is really loaded. It's got a lot of energy going on here. And because Ketu is there and Rahu is over there, it's opposite. It's pulling you, maybe taking your creative projects and then putting them out there in the world to benefit the world in front of your peers so you can get the feedback that you need to develop it further. Now the 8th house is your partner's resources. It's also the occult sciences and, let me see, inheritance, endings, career change, life and death. It's kind of what you had a Sanskrit word for it, but it's one of the life houses, which is interesting because it's also a death house. And it's being activated by the eclipse and the Mars there in his own sign. That must be a really interesting thing going on for Virgo rising people. So let's see, Mars is ruling the 3rd, and it's ruling the 8th and in the 8th. So maybe something happening with siblings and inheritance for some of you. Or maybe you're just learning some of the basic rudimentary information, knowledge of the occult sciences because it's aspecting the 3rd and is ruling the 3rd. So what do you have to say about all this, Neeshee? This is kind of interesting for Virgo, isn't it?
It is interesting. I think they need to put more energy into meditation and those kinds of passive activities because that's where I see the energy happening for, like that Mars in the 8th house, then the full moon is in their 12th. To me, those are the kind of the strong energies happening for them during the eclipse. So they should just tune into that by meditating. And there's that 5th house, and that's fine, but I think there's something about it that they're having to let go of, just because of Saturn and Ketu's placement there.
Yeah.
So I think this is lunar eclipses in general are a time of introversion, more than any other type of eclipse, because that's the nature of the moon is subjective, personal, inward. And to me, Virgo shows those qualities more than anybody else, looking at these aspects with that full moon in the 12th and Mars in the 8th. You know, that 8th and 12th house connection. So I think they should be very spiritually focused during the eclipse. I'm not as worried about their diet, although I think that everybody benefits from eating a better diet. And the eclipse is a good time to do that. And if you notice that your digestion has shifted, you know, like you feel heavier lately, or just like it just feels different than usual, then that's a sign that you should just take a break from food, you know, just fast. Let your body process that shift, you know, without the burden of having to digest something.
Interesting. So this is the end of the Aries to Virgo part 1. So go to Libra to Pisces part 2, and the link is below.